Story number one. I grew up in Robeson County, out in the woods. My family's Lumbee, and out here, the stories are different. Most people talk about skinwalkers in the desert, but we've always had our own weird things. Shape changers, watchers in the trees, old stories you don't repeat after dark. I know how that sounds. I'm not superstitious. I'm not the type to see something and blame the supernatural. But last spring, something got into my life. I keep telling myself there's a good explanation, but some nights I can still feel it at the edge of the yard. It started slow. That March, the week of my birthday, a brown dog started hanging around. Big, muddy thing, short muzzle but with a tail that was too thin and a body too long. I'd never seen it before, but it was there every evening after dusk, sat just outside the ring of porch light, staring at me while I smoked. It never barked. Its eyes, swear to God, glowed eerie gold, almost like highway markers, even before full dark. The first time it happened, I told myself it was reflective eye shine, maybe sick. Next night, I came home late, headlights swinging over the edge of the woods by the chicken coop, and caught the same golden dot eyes watching, dead still. The beams didn't spook it. It melted back, slow and low, and a weird wet earth smell hit me, sudden and strong, like swamp mud and old fur. After that, strange things happened. Some nights the chickens screamed, but by the time I ran out, nothing there except the smell of mildew and some damp feathers pushed into the dirt in spiral shapes. Could have been a fox or raccoon, but the ground was dry. No paw prints, just drag marks. For 2 weeks, I started double locking the coop, but the damn thing kept coming back. Sometimes I'd wake up in the dead of night and see from my window a brown and black shadow at the tree line, just sitting, eyes steadily reflecting whatever weak moonlight there was. Always golden yellow, never blinking. One night I left my phone recording video pointed out the window. Total dark most of it. Then at 2:37 a.m., something sparked. 2 dots, low to the ground. They brightened, moved up. Then, no kidding, stood. The thing rose up on 2 legs, slow, like someone with broken knees, dragging up out of the brush. The shape was off, a dog but stretched, thin around the belly, arms too long, head cocked hard to one side. The eyes swiveled right at my window. I swore it grinned, even through the glass. I checked the footage a million times. I told myself, glitch, strange trick of streetlight, maybe even someone playing around. But what about the smell? That wet, rooty stink that stuck around for hours? My cousin said I was stressed, that I needed sleep. Things didn't let up. I'd find muddy paw prints, no, handprints, broad with 2 long fingers, around the edge of the porch. One time, there was a faint bloody smear under the doorknob, but nothing was taken or broken. Each night I tried to sleep, I'd hear breathing outside. Not an animal huff, but slow, rattling, deep in the chest, like a sick person. When I sat bolt upright, the sound cut off. I only ever smelled that sharp, musky rot and saw those damn gold eyes. The worst was the 3rd week. It was raining heavily that night. Thunder, wind, constant drumming on the old trailer roof. I woke at 3 a.m. to scratching at the bedroom window. Steady, slow, like nails dragging wood. For a second, I thought it was tree branches in the storm, but the next flash of lightning showed a long, bare arm. Dark hair, too many joints, fingers pressed to the glass. I froze. Then the eyes blinked open right by the window, bright as car lights, catching the next flash. My chest seized. I swear I saw a long snout, a misshapen smile, and the shape just melted away with the next boom of thunder. When I crawled over on jelly legs, there were streaks, brown mud, and something like old blood, smeared across the glass in wide looping circles. The next day, I couldn't take my mind off what I had seen the other night. I tried to rationalize, but it seemed hard. It was soon dawn, and my mind had already started spiraling again. I had been barely able to sleep, thunderstorms ringing the windows too loud. And then, my room's door was slightly ajar. It felt as if someone had been peeking in. I thought it might be my cousin. I stood up on wobbly feet, heart racing too wild. I checked the house. No one. Nothing except the chilly winds blowing outside. My cousin and everyone else were sleeping in their room. Just as I was about to go to my room, I saw the same golden dots, far at the end of the hallway. I froze on my tracks. It looked like the same dog, except for now. It was slowly transforming. It slowly rose from its fours, turning into something creepy, devoid of any human or animal, shadow-looking grotesque. And then as the thunder rumbled again, I saw the creature, mouth too wide, body made of skeleton, but rotten and black. Golden dots shining way too brightly. It stared at me, too hungrily. Nails or claws, whatever they were, too sharp to slash someone in one go. My mind told me to run, but for some reason, I couldn't move. It felt like someone or something was stopping me from moving. And then the creature bolted towards me. Just as it was about to reach me, I heard someone knocking outside, and when I looked back, the creature had vanished. I went to the entryway and checked if someone had been there, but no sign of anyone. Thunder still rumbling, rain splashing hard, but there was no one except for me. My hands shook while I closed the door. I went to my room and locked the windows and door tightly. I couldn't sleep the whole night, the creature still haunting me. Before dawn, I collected what mattered and bolted for my brother's place in Pembroke. All along the drive, I kept catching gold glimmers in the rear view, ducking below the line of the pines, always just out of focus. Everyone told me foxes or coyotes act wild in the spring, animals get sick, act wrong. Maybe some local creep with a flashlight was playing jokes. Maybe the dark just plays tricks on tired minds. Part of me wants to agree, but I haven't slept through a night since. Sometimes I see gold eyes when I close my own. Sometimes I hear slow, wet breathing outside the window, just under the roar of the highway. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe it's just animals. Maybe it's something old and hungry, still waiting, watching, biding time in the dark woods of home. Story number 2. My name is Jack, and I never had much of a taste for parties. The crowds, the noise, the spinning lights all jarred my nerves and made my skin itch. But a few months back, my old college buddies insisted I come out for one of our classmates, Carlos's birthday. After a lot of pressure, I caved. Since moving to the city, I hadn't seen much of them, and I figured one night wouldn't kill me. The club was nothing special. Dimly lit, walls pulsing to the DJ's beat, with bodies packed in so tight that spilled drinks stuck to the floor. Being Blackfoot, I often found myself standing apart in these scenes, watching everyone else flow together. But my friends, after a round of cheap whiskey shots, kept shoving me from behind and laughing, urging me to loosen up. The liquor burned in my stomach, waves of warmth spreading until my legs felt unsteady beneath me. That's when I noticed her. A woman I hadn't seen come in, wearing a red dress so bright it seemed to absorb the club's meager light. She was dancing at the edge of the crowd, moving in smooth, slow circles where everyone else jerked and bounced in chaos. Her gaze found mine, pinning me in place. I tried to look away. I'm not good with eye contact, but every time I looked back, she was still staring. I tried to convince myself she'd chosen someone else to look at, but my skin prickled. After a while, she raised her hand in a gesture, a curling of her finger, lethal and inviting, beckoning me to the dance floor. Through the alcohol haze, I debated it, but the music pulled me forward, step by step, until I was close enough to feel the heat of her skin. She pulled me closer, so close I could smell her hair. Something floral, but with an undertone like iron. Her hands were soft, unnecessarily cold, even through the heavy warmth of the room, and she trailed her fingers over my forearms, tracing the tattoos snaking up my skin. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I couldn't think straight. Maybe it was the alcohol, maybe the static in the air, but she felt unreal. The way she looked at me, hungry, intense, made the hairs on my neck rise. Her lips hovered, brushing my ear, and her breath was icy as she leaned in, whispering things I couldn't quite catch. Whatever she said, it made my skin crawl and my cheeks burn at the same time. Next thing I knew, her hand slipped into mine, tugging me toward the hallway near the restrooms. My mind reeled. This was what I said I wanted, right? Yet something felt wrong, off kilter, as if I were moving inside a fever dream. I hesitated, but then from across the dance floor, I saw my friends. They were cheering, waving at me, giving me exaggerated thumbs up. At first, that grounded me, confirmation that this was really happening, but I realized I didn't want to leave with her. My feet felt rooted. While I stood, torn, the woman glided up behind me again, circling her arm around my waist, pressing her lips against my neck. Her voice was so low, I almost thought I imagined it, but I caught the tail end, tempting, dirty, an invitation to the back. My skin crawled, not with desire, but with a strange, cold dread. I looked for my friends again. They beckoned, gesturing for me to come along. They were ready to grab a few tacos on the way home. My mind was swimming. I mumbled an apology to the woman in the red dress and pulled away, stumbling after my friends as the club seemed to close in around me. I didn't look back as we left. I woke the next morning with a splitting headache and a vibrating sense of unease. The faint traces of the night before clung to me. Her perfume, the way her hands had felt wrong on my skin. I saw my hands faint bruises, crawling up my arms on the places where the woman had touched me. I saw my neck where she had kissed. A ferocious bite mark was there. It was as if some animal had bitten me, but I don't recall any of it. I saw wilted flowers spread across my room, all smelling of rot. I picked one of them, and suddenly it felt as if I had touched a burning piece of coal. I immediately threw the flower, and there was a faint, small burnt mark around my fingers. I texted my friends asking, half trying to sound nonchalant, if they'd seen the woman I danced with. They responded with confusion. At first I thought they were joking. That kind of prank wouldn't be out of line for them. But in their replies, there was only bafflement. I'd been alone, they said, just moving on the dance floor by myself. The only reason they'd given me the thumbs up was because they'd finally seen me relax, seen me join the world for once. That girl in red? They'd noticed me moving, sure, but to them I was dancing in a clear spot, awkward and flushed. Arms sometimes outstretched as if toward an invisible partner, sometimes clutching myself, swaying alone. No one else. I tried to brush it off. Maybe it was the alcohol. Maybe the pulsing neon lights had sliced up my memories, tricked my eyes, or maybe the room was too warm, the beat too loud. Still, I checked my phone, trying to find any evidence of that woman in a red dress. But my gallery had nothing. It was as if I had been dreaming the whole thing till now. A fever dream, maybe. For weeks afterward, small things started to trouble me. I'd walk downtown and catch flashes of vivid red weaving through a crowd. I'd smell that iron floral scent at random, on the bus, or turning down a staircase at work, vanishing before I could place it. I convinced myself it was my mind, replaying the night over and over, trying to fill in the blanks. Some part of me wanted a rational answer, a drunken hallucination, an overactive imagination spun up by too many ghost stories back home. I'd been warned by elders about places with too much energy, about losing a piece of yourself in someone else's dance. I told myself those old stories were just in my head, but it kept happening. Objects in my apartment would be in the wrong place. I'd find red hair on my sleeve, though I lived alone, and my own hair was jet black. More than once, strange chills would seize me at night, as if cold hands pressed down on my limbs. Sometimes around the edge of sleep, I'd feel breath on my neck, cold and humid, and wake up convinced a whisper had followed me out of the dream. I was different too, jumpier, flinching at shadows and movement in mirrors, always looking over my shoulder on crowded sidewalks. I haven't told anyone else, and I know how it sounds. A drunk guy with a crush, or some screw loose that let the night run wild inside his head. But even now, months later, some nights I'm still woken by the phantom smell of her perfume, and I remember how real her hands felt against my skin. Maybe it was just the liquor and nerves. Maybe it was the sort of loneliness that makes you see things that aren't really there. Or maybe, just maybe, there are some dances you don't want to finish and some partners you can't leave behind. I try not to stay up too late anymore, and I always check twice before going out with friends. But that memory, half nightmare, half fantasy, never really lets me go. Sometimes in the corner of my eye, I still see a flash of red waiting in the crowd. And I wonder if it's just my mind or if something else followed me home that night, still waiting for me to step out and join its dance again. Story number 3. I am in my late 30s, and I've lived all my life near the edge of the res in Arizona, where the clay dirt meets a bristle of mesquite and juniper. Generations of my family have walked and watched this land. It's easy for outsiders to think of our home as just flat wilderness, but to us, every turn and stretch means something. You learn to respect stories, but you also tell yourself you're not afraid of shadows. It started on a Thursday night, late summer, hotter than a stovetop even after sunset. I was driving my old Ford back from my cousin's after helping him with his swamp cooler. Maybe I was tired. Maybe it was just bad luck. Suddenly, the truck jerked with a heavy clunk. The tire tread had come clean off. Alone, miles out with no cell signal, I grabbed my flashlight and started walking. The road wound through the dark desert, and a shortcut path ran from the highway over to where my uncle lived. I'd walked it a dozen times. Out there, you learn to use your ears, and that night, all I could hear was my boots crunching gravel and a far-off dog's bark, cut sharp against the silence. The moonlight was weak, barely enough to pick out sage in the start of the footpath, the one marked by a leaning fence post. The path always ran straight for a bit, then curved past an old cattle gate, crossed a dry wash, and then bent east toward my uncle's place. It shouldn't take more than 15, 20 minutes walking. I was maybe 5 minutes in, head down, when I noticed something odd. The shadows kept flickering around me, but there was no wind. At first, I figured it was the flashlight beam hitting spiderwebs or catching grasshoppers, but a weird hush slid over the place like the world sucked in its breath. I couldn't even hear crickets or the far-off train. It was just still. I kept walking. The path seemed to jitter under my feet, almost shimmering. Chalk it up to fatigue or the weird way desert air bends at night. But the ground felt softer, almost loose, like I was walking on a blanket poured over gravel. The beam of my flashlight trembled a little in my hand, and the yellow light kept picking out these odd pale stones that I didn't remember ever seeing along the path. Their shapes were wrong, almost sharp-edged and white, sticking out like broken teeth from the dust. I kept glancing up, looking for the outline of the bent juniper that always grew halfway down, but after a bit, it looked like I hadn't moved forward at all. The same barbed wire fence, twisted and old, kept showing up on my right, the posts drooping with rust and age. I started counting steps, using the steady rhythm to calm myself. 47, 48, 49. Then the world seemed to double back. I swear the ground rolled under my boots, and suddenly I was next to the same cattle gate I'd passed already. I could make out the faded green paint and a missing bolt, exactly the same as before. The air got thick, heavy with the scent of hot metal and dust. I felt sweat collect on my neck, even as a sudden chill crept over my skin, like I'd walked through a hanging washcloth left in the freezer. The flashlight flickered, the batteries knew just that morning, but the light was fluttering as if something moved across it. I heard a noise, not an animal, not wind. It sounded like low voices murmuring, too soft to make words, rolling out and around, coming from the ground itself. My boots slipped on the path, and for a second I felt like I might have stepped off into the dry arroyo by mistake, except there was no drop-off, just level ground. But the dirt shifted, and my feet sank ankle-deep into soft, powdery soil. I yanked my foot free with a messy sucking sound, pulse pounding. That's when I saw them. Bare footprints, about the size of a child's, pressed deep in the dust ahead. Each print was crisp and fresh, going forward along the path just ahead of mine, though I'd passed no one. Goosebumps crawled up my arms. My mouth went dry, and the only thing I could taste was hot, bitter metal. The footprints led ahead, snaking side to side, getting smaller the further they went until they vanished. Above me, the sky scrimmed over, the moon lost behind stretching clouds, and the only light was the guttering, failing beam of my old flashlight. Strange shapes started to appear at the edges of the light. Not exactly figures, more like clumps of long grass and sticks bending together in the breeze, though I couldn't feel any wind. At this point, my thoughts were racing. Grown man or not, the feeling of something watching from the brush was so heavy it pressed into my ribs. Every step I took felt heavier, louder. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught a flicker of movement, like someone ducking behind a bush, or maybe an arm darting away. But every time I swung the beam that way, there was nothing, just shadows. Sometimes the shapes seemed to pulse, clustering and parting silently. By this time, panic was rising in my chest. I tried to backtrack, turning around and following my own prints. But then the path twisted, and behind me was just a wide black desert. For a moment, I thought I might scream. Then through the half-dark, I spotted a faint flickering light ahead. It wobbled like a candle, far off but unmistakable. The path tilted sideways and I stumbled toward it, boots slipping in the powdery sand. The sound of the low voices grew louder, almost humming in my skull. But as I got closer to the light, everything snapped. Silence dropped back in, and the heavy air lifted. Suddenly, I stood just a few feet from my uncle's front porch. The light was his bug-splattered lantern. The path behind me looked perfectly normal. My phone gave 2 bars and the world felt right again. Later, I checked my boots in his kitchen. The dust caked on thick, but not a sign of those footprints. No sign of anything strange. My uncle just gave me a knowing look and a mug of coffee. Maybe it was heat, fear, and long hours twisting my brain. Maybe I took a wrong turn. Maybe it was the land reminding me to respect it. I don't take the shortcut after dark anymore. There's no proof of what happened, but the memory lingers. The hush, the chill, the feeling of being tracked on an endless path that wasn't made for me. The desert keeps its secrets, one way or another. Story number 4. My name is Daniel Whitefeather. I grew up on the northern edge of a small reservation town, tucked between dusty highways and wild pine forests. I've heard plenty of stories: trailside hauntings, skinwalker sightings, whispers in the trees. But one night still chills me, and I wasn't even the one behind the wheel. I was 11 when my older cousin Elijah told me what he'd seen. He'd always been a straight-laced kind of man, never taking more than a swig at a family barbecue, the type who'd rather ride his old Pontiac than try his luck at lore. I remember sitting on the worn step outside his trailer, summer air thick, night stretching out wide and endless. The way Elijah talked, voice low and steady, made what happened crawl under my skin, sharp as thorn. Elijah said he was coming back from a late shift at the mill. It was long after midnight. The main road out of town ran between the stretches of empty fields and patches of trees, flat and straight until you'd think you could see clear to the edge of the world. The road is lonely at night, only the pale orange street lights breaking the dark. Most nights there's nothing moving, but maybe a deer or two. That night, Elijah was alone. At least he thought he was. The old car was running better than usual. The way Elijah told it, he was feeling alive, a bit reckless, windows cracked and the radio barely catching a signal. The speedometer crept past the posted limit, hum of tires on asphalt blending with the static on the radio. That's when something changed. Elijah noticed the streetlights. One by one, they began flickering. At first, he thought it was a coincidence. Everyone knows about faulty wires out here. Power surges from a storm or a transformer rusting through. But these lights didn't just flicker out. They blinked in a pattern, right, left, 2 at a time, always just ahead of his car, pulsing with a cold, stuttering rhythm. The effect was like driving through the blink of some enormous, unseen eye. Elijah slowed, pulse drumming faster, that faint prickling on the back of his neck like cold rain starting up before a storm. He tried to laugh it off, told himself stories like people do when the dark presses in. That was when he saw the woman standing on the far side of the road. She was dressed in white. Her clothes hung loose and heavy, the fabric old-fashioned, yellowed in the sickly streetlight, with shadows pooling beneath her feet. She wasn't moving. She just stared. Elijah was sure for a frozen instant that her eyes locked on him. Even through the window, even through the distance. It seemed as if the world shrank until there was nothing but the car, the road, and this silent, watching figure. He almost hit the curb, swerving hard, palms slick on the steering wheel. For a moment, his mind slipped. The way you forget your own hands when they freeze up in fear. He couldn't remember if he'd even blinked. By the time he forced himself to slow down, breath burning harsh in his chest, the woman was gone. Nothing but empty road behind him, streetlights stuttering back to their normal glow. He wondered if he was too tired, maybe seeing things. Long shifts and lousy sleep mess with your head. He rolled on, slower now, glancing in every mirror, his hands shaking a little on the wheel. That was when something else started. From the shadows at the side of the road, a flash of white, and then he saw her again. But this time, she was running, matching the car's pace with impossible ease. Her feet didn't seem to touch the road. Her face was mostly hidden beneath a tumble of long, black hair. But the half Elijah glimpsed didn't look right. Skin bloated, gray-green and soft as rotten fruit. Bone peeking through wet flesh. Her mouth gaped open in a ruin of lips, and one foggy eye rolled with a dead stare. Pupil just a pinprick. Her arms pumped like a ragged animal's, and her white dress whispered in the wind. But she never slowed. Elijah locked his doors, heart snapping at his ribs. He pressed his foot to the gas, but no matter how fast he drove, she darted alongside, always keeping pace, barely a blur at the edge of his vision. Fingers, cracked and thin as sticks, tapped on the glass, rapid and sharp, as if she was knocking in a frantic code. The car shuddered with each touch. Elijah didn't dare turn his head again, just kept his eyes on the road, lips moving in a wordless prayer. Finally, curiosity or panic, or maybe both, got the better of him. He risked a glance. She was gone. Nothing but the receding highway behind. Relief almost split his chest. He let out a breath. As he looked back to the road, his eyes caught the old, dusty rearview mirror. That's when he saw her again, inside the car. She was sitting in the back seat, right behind him, twisted at an unnatural angle, with that smile too wide and gums slick and livid, like mold grown over meat. Her eyes met his in the mirror, lips pulled back in a silent snarl or laugh. Elijah never decided which. The air inside the car turned cold, far colder than the summer night outside. He could smell something foul, sharp as rot. Earth turned after rain, a whiff of old cabbage and wet fur. He slammed the brakes. The Pontiac jerked savagely, tires screeching. For a moment, everything blurred. Elijah's chin hit the steering wheel, his hands scrambling. When he looked up, the rear seat was empty. A quick, panicked reach back showed nothing but worn fabric. No heat, no pressure, no lingering sign but the ragged sound of his own breath. Before he could gather himself, he looked straight ahead. She was there, standing in front of the car. Closer than before, close enough that her face was pressed nearly to the windshield, cheeks sunken, one hand splayed on the hood. The air tasted metallic, and the world seemed to squeeze tight. Elijah said his vision frayed at the edges, like static running around his eyes. She lunged, face splitting impossibly wide. Elijah ducked, covering his head with his arms, convinced she would crash through the glass. After a minute passed, a lifetime perhaps, he looked up. There was nothing. No woman, no smear, no sound. The road was empty, windless, utterly still except for his heart pounding. He floored the accelerator, bolting down the rest of the highway and home, not stopping until daylight pressed against the curtains. Elijah never took that road at night again. When he told me this story years ago, something in the air shifted. I remember feeling eyes on us, as if the dark itself was listening. Part of me swore I saw a pale hand in the corner of my eye, vanishing as soon as I turned. But I am not sure how to explain it away. Road fatigue, tricks of shadow, the mind's way of filling gaps in the dim. Still, I can't help but wonder. Since that night, I sometimes see things out of the corner of my eye along those old highways, a flicker where no one stands, a cold patch that presses in for no reason. Maybe it's just old stories, or maybe something else rides those roads, watching, waiting, and never quite gone. Even now, I never feel truly alone after dark. Story number 5. I was raised hearing stories about Antelope Ridge, but I'd never put much stock in any of them. My family is Ute Mountain Ute, and we've lived in this part of southwestern Colorado for generations. I'm a maintenance worker for the county, sane, practical, and not given to flights of fancy. Night after night, I drive past that rock spine off the highway, the one with the old cedars riddling the slopes, thinking of it as just another chunk of dry land. That fall, work had been stressful. My cousin Joe and some friends wanted a weekend away from everything, so we decided to spend a night camping up on the ridge. I figured it would do me some good to sit by a fire, maybe spot some deer in the early light. The forecast showed no storms. The truck was full of gear and beer. We left after sunset. The road up to Antelope Ridge is nothing but ruts and loose gravel. As we bounced along, I kept thinking about how the elders always warned against camping up there when the moon was thin. My mother used to say the land went quiet on such nights, like it was holding its breath. I shrugged it off. Just meant there'd be less traffic, maybe a peaceful break. We arrived around 10. The stars were thick and bright, a few clouds smudging out the constellations. Cold wind moved through the cedars, carrying the smell of dust and juniper. We set the tent and built a fire, passing around jerky and old family stories. At first, it felt just like every other camping trip. At about midnight, Joe pointed out a faint glow creeping up behind one of the western ridges. I thought it might be distant headlights bouncing off low clouds, but the light grew faster than a car could move, oozing orange and blue, flickering like candle flames caught in a storm. The air shifted, suddenly warm and sharp, smelling like burnt metal. Every hair on my arm stood on end. The others went silent. Without a word, we walked out beyond the circle of firelight. Everyone else had moved to some other direction, leaving me alone in the dark. The ridge felt eerily quiet. About 30 feet away, past some dead fall, I saw a pale sphere floating between the twisted trunks. It was the size of a basketball, drifting just above the ground. Then it split clean in two, one half sliding right, the other left, moving in a zigzag through the brush. For a few seconds, I heard a crackling snap, like static on a radio echoing under my ribs. I tried to take pictures on my phone. My screen went black and refused to turn on, even with a fresh battery. The flashlight I had got fizzled out after 2 seconds. I kept blinking, wondering if my eyes were playing tricks from the firelight. Another orb appeared, then another, 5 or 6 in total, weaving through the woods. When I turned back to the fire, it looked faded and shimmery, like I was viewing it through a wet pane of glass. There were sharp shadows on the ground, but no obvious source causing them. The rest of the world felt too quiet, just the thumping of my heart and the scrape of wind on stone. One of the friends, a city kid named Emily, saw another orb and decided to follow it closely down the hill. We watched her, flashlight bobbing, drifting further from camp. The lights darted ahead, always just out of reach, like they were luring her on. A kind of darkness pressed in. The orbs were gone, the hills ink black. 20 minutes passed, then 40. We shouted, but our voices seemed to just eat up the sound. They didn't echo, they didn't carry. When we expected noise, there was nothing at all. Nothing but the dry grass and the scratch of my own boots shuffling in the dust. After an hour, Emily reappeared, stumbling up from the ravine. Her face was bone white, eyes unfocused. She muttered something none of us could understand. I recognized a few words, snatches of Ute, though Emily didn't know the language. She collapsed next to the fire, shivering, and refused to say anything more that night. Everyone was on edge now. I kept seeing little sparks in the tree line, flickering in and out. At one point, it looked like dozens of thin, shadowy figures were walking between the orbs, their bodies stretched and almost boneless, blacker than the night around them. I rubbed my eyes raw, convinced it had to be after images or tricks of the mind, but the shapes would not leave. A coyote screamed not far off, the sound weirdly drawn out and distorted. A rush of wind flattened the campfire nearly to nothing, and for just a heartbeat, the smell changed, like sweet blood mixed with wet earth. The fear was primal. The pressure made every muscle lock up. We huddled together for the next couple of hours, nobody sleeping, all pretending not to watch the shadows twitching just out of the firelight. It felt like looking over a cliff edge. Nothing beneath, only the sense of falling. By dawn, everything was normal again. The sky was clear, the cold dry and easy to breathe. Emily acted like nothing strange had happened, but I caught her glancing at the tree line more than once. I checked my phones. Recordings were nothing but static, any photos taken after midnight warped and blank. My GPS tracker, which I usually take for wilderness jobs, had jumped 2 miles east between midnight and 4, even though I'd never left camp. I tried to tell myself it was atmospheric light, some weather trick, ball lightning or swamp gas, maybe magnetic fields. I'd heard about that on some science show. The lack of sound might have been the wind blowing the wrong way, or our minds amplifying small noises. Maybe the shapes were just tricks of tired eyes. The official story is that majorly I had a weird night, saw some lights, and nobody was hurt. Still, I don't camp there anymore. A few months later, I heard an elder say the orbs always return on thin moon nights, looking for something. He won't say what. Sometimes when I pass Antelope Ridge at dusk, I spot a flicker, orange then blue, hovering near the cedars. I keep my eyes on the road and drive a little faster. Things went back to normal mostly, but I still hear the electric crackle in my dreams, and sometimes wake with my skin crawling and the taste of burnt metal in my mouth. I tell people it was just tricks of light. I want to believe that, but I haven't set foot on that ridge after dark since, and I know I never will. Maybe it's safer, not knowing what's out there, flickering just beyond the firelight. Maybe that's why the land holds its breath. Story number 6. I don't usually believe in things that don't belong to this world or do not have any rational explanation, but sometimes there are things that don't leave you easily, haunting you for the rest of your life, questioning if things without any explanation can happen. This has stayed with me for years. Maybe it's the way it was told to me, beneath a sky of low, scudding clouds while smoke from our fire coiled in the gusting night wind. Or maybe it's because of the details I couldn't quite brush off. It was back in the fall, 4, maybe 5 years ago, with the moss on the trees extra thick and the smell of coming snow in the air. I'd been working outside all day, clearing brush for the local reserve. That evening, the elders gathered around the battered camp table, and the talk turned to old legends, the tricksters and warning stories every native kid learns. An uncle, twice removed, said he had a story more recent, though it traveled from far off across the sea ice north and east to Greenland. Part of me tuned out until he talked about a drifting ghost ship, and then I listened. The story goes, in October 1775, a captain named Warren was running his own vessel, nothing but an ordinary British whaling ship, when he spotted a masted silhouette caught in a narrow passage between glassy slabs of Greenlandic ice. No smoke from the chimneys, and no seabirds wheeling overhead. Warren's men hailed her, but got only silence, save for the echo of their own voices muffled by the fog. The air then was so cold it knifed at your lungs and crusted every rope with hoarfrost. Warren pulled his boat alongside and, with some of his crew, boarded the silent ship. In some records, it's called the Octavius, in others the Gloriana, but names hardly matter when a chill that deep finds its way under your nails. None of the men wanted to go alone. The ship gave off a feeling, they said, like walking into a room right after someone had died. Lamps and lanterns still hung unlit. The only sound was the eerie groan of ice rending wood in the hull below. Inside, the crew was found where they sat, at tables, hammocks, chairs, frozen in the positions of everyday life. Some clutched spoons near their mouths, others cards. The corners fused to their frost-bitten fingers. Their faces were tilted, eyes rimmed with frost, lips pulled back in sounds never made. The floor was slick with a thin film of ice, and silence reigned everywhere. One of Warren's men slipped climbing down the ladder to the hold and took the lantern with him. When the glass shattered, the sound echoed for far longer than it should have, as if the ship's timbers themselves were hollow with something deeper than decay. In the dimness below deck, food stores were intact, but all covered with a dusting of white mold, like the frost had seeped into the wood, into the flour, into the barrels themselves. But it was the captain's quarters that held the worst of it. The air inside was still and thick with the musk of old cloth, rot, and brine. The logbook sat open on a desk, pen in the dead hand of a gaunt figure leaning forward, as if he hadn't quite finished his last thought. Some descriptions claim the captain's face and hands were stained with something green and sticky, like moss from the bottom of a pond. And his eyes, the eyes especially, were veiled by a peel of greenish slime, as if the sea itself had grown over him. In the corner, a woman wrapped in a woolen plaid cradled a baby, mother and child frozen into a single shape, lost to one another a long time ago. Across from them, a sailor held a tinderbox, snapped forever in the motion of striking a spark that would never come. If there was any breath left to be seen, it would have coiled in the air above the desk. But there was only stillness. Warren skimmed the logbook. The last words were an entry, barely legible, written 13 years before, on November 11th, 1762. Not a soul could guess why or how the ship had remained adrift so long, or how it survived to drift the currents without foundering. Something about the air, a heavy, briny warmth beneath the ice chill, made the men's eyes water and their teeth ache. 2 men complained of near blindness just from entering the captain's quarters, and claimed later back on their own boat to have found a waxy residue on their faces, as though the mold from the captain's corpse had passed on to them. To my ear, the story could have ended there, a bad dream, or some trick of fear and sunless winter. But there was more. While Warren's men grabbed the logbook and ran, feet clattering on the planks, one said he heard a click from the shadows near the companionway, like another pen being closed or a lock being gently slid into place. Another claimed the air thickened as if the ship itself was exhaling. No one went back for their drop lamp. They fled to their own ship, the logbook clutched tight. The Octavius, if that was its name, was left behind. No record of her was found after, though northern whalers claimed to see a derelict vessel now and then, black paint chafed off by wind and ice, drifting silently along routes no sane man would sail. A few said that under certain moonless nights, a greenish vapor could be seen rolling from an empty wheelhouse, or that a frozen figure stared out from the quarterdeck, eyes glossy and indistinct as rotting kelp. Some might say it was just the cold, cryonic preservation at work, or an early case of mass carbon monoxide poisoning, or a tramp's tale spun by bored sailors with little enough to do during Arctic nights long as a bad marriage. But I know how it felt to hear it told, breath ghosting in the wind and firelight flickering over stone and bark. Warren's ship's log, if it ever existed, was never found. The details changed each time an elder repeated the story, yet the feeling lingered, a wrongness buried beneath the frost and salt. Sometimes in winter, when the wind howls through the pines and icy mist crawls up from the river, I remember those details, the mold, the frozen faces, the silence, and listen close. And every now and then, I wonder what might drift along the currents, hidden by fog, waiting for another wrong turn to bring a ship or a man within reach. Story number 7. I always considered myself a rational man. My mother, a Dakota, taught me to respect mysteries, but never to fear them without cause. Ghost stories were for children, not for grown men who knew the world was mostly indifferent, rarely malicious. In the summer of 2014, my friend Jared and I spent 3 weeks in Japan, intent on hiking Buddhist trails and experiencing the silence of ancient shrines. One day, we found ourselves at Mount Koyasan, drawn by guidebook tales of Okunoin Cemetery, the largest and oldest in Japan, whose mossy silence is whispered to be sacred. Those who haven't been there can't quite picture it. Every path seems to fold upon itself. Tall, ancient cedars scramble the sunlight, and moss blankets the stone like green snow. There is a pressure in the air, a hush growing heavier the deeper you walk beneath all those grave lanterns and soda can offerings left for the dead. The place smells damp and mineral, cool as a cave even in the muggiest heat. Sometimes I'd feel the fine hairs at the nape of my neck stir, as if someone was standing behind me, though I'd turn and see nothing but roots clawing old upturned graves. We split up, planning to meet at Kobodaishi's mausoleum as the sun set. I wandered off trail, caught in the quiet spell the place casts. That's when I found the well. It was set in a clearing, the stones mottled by lichen and sunk with age. A chain-link fence snaked half-heartedly around it, too new, unsubtle, as if the monks reluctantly gave in to modern fears. In front of the well stood a signboard, the characters worn, but a smaller plaque beside it carried the English translation. I read the legend, squinting in the dimness. If you look into the water and do not see your own reflection, death will come within 3 years. The words seemed almost embarrassed to be there, and their stiffness made me smirk. At best, it was a folk caution. I squatted down thinking maybe I'd peer in and take a photo. But as my eyes climbed the darkness within, I felt something I couldn't quite name, a kind of weight pressing into my sternum, the same feeling I'd gotten years ago during a vision quest fasting in the Badlands, when the wind howled under the tent and I doubted what was real. I hesitated. I remembered almost absently all those stories my grandmother told of mirrors turning strange at dawn, spirits slipping through in water's surface. That same unease made my fingertips tickle. It would have been simple to look in, disprove the old lore, but a dull dread pinned me in place. I heard shuffling behind me, Jared as it turned out, who, with an easy laugh, sauntered up and looked into the well before I could warn him against it. I didn't watch. Instead, I stepped back, skin prickling, and almost tripped over a pile of decaying flowers beside the fence. There was a rotten sweetness to them, crawling with ants, as if something in the ground itself was digesting offerings before they could wither. I stared, thinking it odd that every fresh bouquet I'd seen before was untouched. Only beside the well, life turned with alarming speed to rot. Jared tried to joke about the whole thing, but I felt too queasy to play along. He said I should look, prove I was man enough to test an old superstition. Yet something in the way shadows moved inside the well told me not to. Water is just a mirror, and darkness only absence of light. But in that moment it felt heavier, as if peering in would be granting permission to something waiting down there. I refused, telling him to let it be. That evening we sat beneath chains of wishing lanterns and drank vending machine coffee. At first I wanted nothing of what he'd seen or thought he saw. 2 days later, on a bullet train to Kyoto, curiosity bit at me. I asked what he saw in the well. Jared turned pale. He said at first the water was murky, shifting, and for a moment he couldn't see anything at all. Then his own face surfaced, off-center and warped, the eyes too wide and too dark, a faint silvery shape behind his shoulder. He blinked and it was gone. Maybe, he added, it was the angle, the water, the heat. 2 tourists, tired and spun up by cemetery stories. We let it go, mostly, but something stayed with me, a dragging unease that rose again in the weeks following our return. Sometimes, as I cleaned out the bathtub, I'd catch a trick of the light, my own face distorted in the standing water, or a suggestion of another shape behind my head, gone as soon as I looked twice. It was nothing, I told myself. Imagination. Jared and I kept in touch. 3 months later, he called to mention a string of odd events. His cat stared at empty corners, meowing in agitation. His phone unlocked itself in the night and finished typing unfinished texts. His reflection caught in a fog mirror once seemed to smile a half-second longer than his real face. These are the sorts of things you brush off as stress, psychological quirks, and electrical faults. But he swore he felt stared at all the way home from Japan. I comforted him, gently scoffing, but sometimes in my own apartment, I felt a coldness. Doors closed themselves. Drafts moved across my feet, though the windows were sealed. My own dreams, too, grew stranger. Stone steps winding downward, lanterns guttering with no wind, hands reaching up from dark water to catch hold of my ankles. I'd wake sweating, my mouth full of the metallic taste of fear. Once, walking home late after a rainy shift, I heard something trailing behind me, slow, unhurried steps that matched my own. I glanced over my shoulder and saw only the reflection of the street lamps in the slick asphalt, but my shadow seemed subtly altered. Longer, as if another figure was stitched in. At the time, I blamed exhaustion, even as my heart banged against my chest. 3 years passed. Jared remained alive, if less carefree than before. The odd happenings tapered off, replaced by a silent truce. But the memory of that well stayed sharp, refusing to scab over. I try to reason all of it away. The rotten bouquet, the shifting reflection, the quiet slide of unease. My friend and I are alive, sure, and maybe it was due to suggestion, cultural folklore, faulty wiring, and fatigue. But sometimes when the sun sets sideways across my living room mirror and my own face seems a hair slower to follow my movements, I find myself glancing away, mouth dry, heart tight. I tell myself there's nothing to fear, even as the chill of Matt Koyasan's shadow seems to gather in the corner of my eye, just beyond where I care to look. Some mysteries are too patient for answers.